Badlands is still eroding today. Eroding at a rate of about 1 inch per year. It is an erosion that continues to expose one of the nation's greatest fossil treasures. Large fossil mammals that lived 30 million years ago. Large fossil mammals that are found as isolated individuals or in mass graves known as mortality bone beds.
White River Badlands looked like modern-day Africa, with broad plains, lots of different animals. But when I think of Africa, I think of rhinoceros. And this is a fossil rhinoceros from the White River Badlands. If you look closely, you'll notice the first thing that's not looking like a rhinoceros is there's no horn. There's not even a base for a horn to grow out of. This was a hornless rhinoceros, about the size of one of those Clydesdales that you see on TV. And it ran in herds across the White River Badlands. It was very fleet-footed. It wasn't the lumbering animal that we think of the modern rhino. And this rhino ran freely on the plains, and they had to run because there were lots of predators around. We'll talk about the predators in a minute. All kinds of other animals lived in the Badlands. When you think of modern Africa, you think of camels, and this is a camel skull. Small, isn't it? About the size of an Irish setter. This is an ancestor to a camel, so they started out small and got larger. This is a very cute little camel skull, and the camels were very tasty items, or they must have been tasty, because I find many of them that have been eaten by the predators. And this one has a bite mark in the top of its head from a saber-toothed cat. Other animals that ran around Africa today are the zebras. And in the fossil times, we had fossil horses as well. This is a fossil horse. It's called Mesohippus. It was a three-toed horse. And we can look at the three toes on this Mesohippus. Here's one of his feet. Here's his ankle. Here's his shin bone broken off. Here's the foot extending down to the three toes. Very fleet-footed little guy. And you had to be fleet-footed. You had to be fast. You had to be able to get away from the predators, because the predators were just as fast. We have other animals as well. Some animals a little slower. This is called an oreodont. It was the most common animal in the Badlands. It's common to find these. It's common for two reasons. One, there were a lot of them in the fossil times. Second reason is they lived in burrows, like modern-day prairie dogs. They lived in colonies, family colonies. When we find these, we find them in burrows, and we find groups of burrows together. So they were preserved well. There were a lot of them. They died in a convenient spot, so we find many of them. Another burrowing animal, you don't think of it as a burrowing animal, is a tortoise. This is a tortoise from the White River Badlands. It's related to the modern-day gopher tortoise that lives in Florida today. There were a lot of these, and some of them grew to be huge. Some of them grew to be 3 feet across. This is a young one. So we've got mammals, we've got reptiles, and we've got birds. These are fossil eggs from an aquatic bird, something like a duck or a goose. We don't find many skeletons of the aquatic birds, but we do find the eggs. And we find them in groups, so we knew that they were nesting, making clutches of eggs. They weren't just laying single eggs. So we've got a pretty good idea of what modern-day Africa is like, and we have a pretty good idea of what the White River Badlands were like. We've got rhinos, we have zebras, or Mesohippus, the three-toed horse, we have camels, we have the oreodont, which is related to the sheep and the goats, we have tortoises, and we have birds, maybe like a duck or a goose. We also have fossil warthogs. This is a fossil warthog, and this is still in the rock as it was discovered. Here's the skull, there's the eye. This is the lower jaw that slipped out from underneath the skull and is now sitting in front of the skull. The fossil warthog lived like the oreodont and like the tortoise. They built burrows. and went into the burrows and lived underground. So we find a lot of the warthogs, we find a lot of the oriodonts, we find a lot of the tortoises. Now these guys were being chased and eaten by a variety of animals. This is one. This is a saber-toothed cat. It's called Hoplophonius. It's quite small compared to the La Brea tar pit cats. You're used to seeing the giant sabers and the giant skulls from the La Brea tar pits. However, this is the ancestor to them. They started out small like the zebras and like the camels. This one was killed by another saber-toothed tiger, and we can see the scar in the top of its head here where the cranium was caved in by a bite from another predator, probably a saber-toothed tiger. So we've got cats. Now we need dogs. This is a dog. Not a true dog, but very similar to the modern day dogs. This is called the Phoenix, about the size of a coyote, and it was built much like a modern day coyote. Pretty fleet-footed, had to be fast in order to catch these guys to live. Now the biggest and baddest predator in the Badlands was the hyenodon. The hyenodon was terribly fierce. It didn't just live in the White River Badlands, it lived around the world from the time of the dinosaurs up to the Ice Age. And in each one of these environments where it lived, it was the king. It was the top predator. And this is a hyenodon here. It's a large, large skull. It's almost as big as an African lion skull. Just a huge animal. And it had powerful jaws. This big crest that you see here, these two crests, that's where the muscles to attach to that make the jaws strong. They had big crests with big muscles making a big, strong bite. This guy was fierce, and if you weren't fast, you were dead. The hyenodon we just saw was an old grandpa hyenodon, an old gummer, big old guy that had lived and seen a lot of things. This is a subadult, a juvenile, a younger version of that giant skull that we saw. The wonderful thing about the fossil record is that we get to see things exactly in a stop-action sequence. If you look out the window and took a photograph, that's what you're seeing in the fossil record. We've stopped life. We've stopped action. We have stopped time. And this guy was a juvenile, and he stopped dead in his tracks and was buried. And we found him in the White River Badlands. Now, we know he's a juvenile for a number of reasons. One of them is the bones in the cranium aren't completely